Today on Your Government in Action, where we cover bills, votes, records, and how it affects you. In March 2021, Congress passed a $1.9 trillion bill, and most Americans only knew about the check they got in the mail. $1.9 trillion. That is the size of the American Rescue Plan, signed into law on March 11, 2021. Most people remember the check, $1,400, landing in bank accounts across the country. But here is the thing. Those checks were only about 7% of the total bill. So where did the other 93% go? That is what we are going to find out today. Let us start with what is actually in the bill, because the breakdown might surprise you. The American Rescue Plan is nearly 900 pages long. Let us walk through the biggest pieces. The largest single item was aid to state and local governments, $350 billion. That money went to schools, public transit systems, and local health departments. Think of it as a financial lifeline for cities and states that had burned through their budgets fighting the pandemic. The second big category was direct payments to individuals, $1,400 per adult and $500 per child for households below certain income thresholds. That totaled roughly $420 billion across the country, about 20% of the bill. Unemployment benefits were extended next. The federal government added $300 per week on top of whatever your state already paid. That supplement ran through September 2021. Then there was the child tax credit expansion. Before this bill, families received $2,000 per child. The American Rescue Plan raised that to $3,000, or $3,600 for children under 6. It also made the credit fully refundable for the first time, meaning families who earned too little to owe federal taxes could still receive the full amount. School reopening funds got $130 billion to help districts safely bring students back into classrooms. Vaccine distribution and COVID-19 response received approximately $49 billion. Rental and utility assistance got $46 billion for Americans behind on rent or energy bills. And the Restaurant Revitalization Fund received $28.6 billion to help food service businesses that had lost revenue during closures. According to Congress.gov, those are the primary spending categories in the bill. Now that you know what is in the bill, let us talk about how it actually got passed, because the process was anything but simple. To understand the path this bill took, you have to understand the economic situation in early 2021. The year 2020 had been brutal for the U.S. economy. GDP fell 6.8%, the worst single-year drop since the Great Depression. At the peak of the pandemic in April 2020, the unemployment rate hit 14.7%. By January 2021, it had fallen, but only to 6.7%. Millions of Americans were still out of work, and businesses, especially restaurants and small shops, were still struggling to survive. President Biden introduced the American Rescue Plan on January 14, 2021, just days after taking office. He asked Congress to move fast. The question was, how do you get a bill this big through a closely divided Congress? The Senate was split 50-50, with Democrats and Republicans each holding 50 seats. That meant Democrats had control, but only barely, and only because Vice President Kamala Harris held the tie-breaking vote. Normally, major legislation in the Senate requires 60 votes to overcome a procedural hurdle called the filibuster. Democrats did not have 60 votes, they had 50, so they used a process called budget reconciliation. Reconciliation is a special parliamentary rule that allows certain budget-related bills to pass with just a simple majority, bypassing the 60-vote filibuster threshold entirely. It has been used by both parties over the years. Democrats have used it. Republicans have used it. In this case, Democrats chose to use reconciliation because bipartisan negotiations had failed during the final months of the previous administration, and the economic situation felt urgent. The House moved first. On February 27, 2021, the House passed the original version of the bill by a vote of 219 to 212. Then the bill went to the Senate, where the rules required some changes to meet reconciliation requirements. One notable change: a provision raising the federal minimum wage to $15 per hour was stripped out by the Senate parliamentarian, who ruled it did not qualify under reconciliation rules. The Senate passed its amended version on March 6, 2021. Then the bill went back to the House for a final vote on the Senate version. The House passed it on March 10, 2021 by 220 to 211. President Biden signed it into law the next day, March 11, 2021. So the bill passed, but let us look closely at how every single vote actually went down. Here is a fact that stands out when you look at the vote tallies. Not a single Republican voted for the American Rescue Plan. Not in the House, not in the Senate. 0 Republican votes across both chambers. Let us look at those numbers more carefully. In the House, the first vote on February 27 was 219 in favor, 212 against. Every yes vote came from a Democrat. Every no vote came from a Republican, with 2 Democrats also voting no. In the Senate on March 6, the vote was 50 to 49. Once again, all 50 yes votes came from Democrats. All 49 no votes came from Republicans. 1 Republican senator was absent and did not vote. But here is where it gets interesting. Even getting to 50 Democratic votes was not automatic. Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia pushed back hard on the size of the bill. He initially opposed the $300 weekly unemployment supplement, preferring a lower amount. He also pushed to tighten the income eligibility for stimulus checks, so that higher earners would not receive them. After negotiations with the White House, Manchin got some of those changes and ultimately voted yes. Senator Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona also had concerns but voted yes on final passage. On the Republican side, the position was consistent. The bill was too large, it was not targeted enough, and it would add too much to the national debt. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell argued that most of the money would not be spent immediately, and that the economy was already recovering without this level of spending. Some Republicans proposed a smaller alternative, around $600 billion, but negotiations broke down early. Democrats made the calculation that they had the votes through reconciliation, and moved forward without bipartisan support. The Congressional Budget Office estimated the bill would add $1.9 trillion to the federal deficit over 10 years. That CBO score became a central argument for Republican opponents. When the final House vote came on March 10, the tally was 220 in favor, 211 against. Once again, the split was complete. Democrats yes, Republicans no. President Biden signed the bill the following morning. So the bill passed with 0 Republican votes. The question now is, what actually happened after it was signed? Let us look at what the data shows about the year after this bill was signed. On unemployment, the numbers moved significantly. When Biden signed the bill in March 2021, the unemployment rate was around 6%. By December 2021, it had fallen to 4.2%. That is a drop of nearly 2 full percentage points in under a year. GDP growth in 2021 came in at 5.9%, the fastest annual growth rate the United States had recorded since 1984. Child poverty is another area where the data showed a notable change. Research from Columbia University estimated that the expanded child tax credit cut child poverty rates roughly in half during the months it was in effect. Before the expansion, millions of low-income families received little or nothing from the credit because they did not owe enough in taxes. After the expansion, those families qualified for the full amount. The credit was expanded for the calendar year 2021, and it expired at the end of that year when Congress did not renew it. Now here is where the picture gets more complicated. Inflation also rose sharply in 2021. The Consumer Price Index, which measures the cost of everyday goods and services, hit 7.0% by December 2021. That was the highest inflation rate the United States had seen since 1982. Economists disagreed about why. Former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, a Democrat, had warned before the bill passed that $1.9 trillion in new spending on top of a recovering economy was too much and risked overheating prices. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, also a Democrat, argued that most of the inflation was caused by global supply chain disruptions tied to the pandemic, not by the stimulus. The debate over how much the American Rescue Plan contributed to inflation is ongoing among economists. Both arguments have data behind them. Now let us bring this down to what it actually meant for individual Americans. What did the American Rescue Plan mean for a real person living through 2021? It depends on your situation. If you were a working adult who met the income requirements, you received a direct payment of $1,400. If you had 2 children, your household received an additional $1,000 on top of that. For a family of 4 that qualified, the direct payment alone was $3,800. If you were unemployed, the federal supplement of $300 per week was added on top of your state unemployment payment. For many workers in states with lower unemployment benefits, that supplement nearly doubled their weekly income during the months it was active. If you had children under 18, the child tax credit change was significant. A family with 2 kids under 6 saw their annual credit go from $4,000 to $7,200. And for the first time, families who earned too little to owe federal taxes received the full credit as a direct payment monthly deposited into their bank accounts. If you were a renter who had fallen behind during the pandemic, the $46 billion Rental Assistance Fund made it possible for landlords and tenants to apply for relief, covering back rent and utilities in many cases. If you owned a restaurant or food service business, the Restaurant Revitalization Fund provided grants, not loans, to cover revenue losses. $28.6 billion was set aside, though demand far exceeded what was available and many applicants did not receive funding. If your children were in school, the $130 billion in school funding helped districts pay for ventilation upgrades, testing supplies, and the additional staff needed to safely reopen buildings. The money reached households at different times. Stimulus checks went out within weeks. The expanded child tax credit payments started in July 2021 and ran monthly through December 2021. Rental assistance moved more slowly, with many programs taking months to get funds to landlords and tenants. Source: U.S. Treasury and Congress.gov. The American Rescue Plan was one of the largest economic relief bills in United States history. It sent checks to millions of households, expanded benefits for families with children, and sent hundreds of billions of dollars to state and local governments. It passed with 0 Republican votes, using a special budget process to avoid the Senate filibuster. And it remains one of the most debated pieces of legislation of the 2020s, with economists still arguing about its role in the inflation that followed. If you want to dig into the primary sources yourself, start at Congress.gov and search for H.R. 14/2021. Subscribe to Your Government in Action for more breakdowns like this.